Hello. I'm not sure if anybody's watching yet, but my name's Duncan, and this is my Wednesday live stream that I've started to do recently. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. I just spent time sort of faffing and setting up. Just need to get a sip of drink a second. Yeah, so tonight I've got another sort of, as I said, with these streams, part of my thing is to talk about stuff that I wouldn't normally do a video about. And tonight's one was actually a video that I very nearly did, but I was getting too complicated. I'll talk about that later. First thing I'm going to talk about is Star Wars Day on May the 4th. Assuming everybody can hear me. But yes, May the 4th. I was, me and my wife, we went to see the Phantom Menace at our local cinema. Because it was obviously a re-release from 25th anniversary. And we had a great time. So I have brought with me Jar Jar. An original one. Everybody should love Jar Jar. He is the reason the whole film happens, of course. So, yes, Jar Jar taking a look. So, this is one of the original ones from 1998 as well. And because he's Jar Jar, they actually go for quite a bit of money on eBay, actually. The pop figures, there's a pop figure of Jar Jar Binks that goes for silly money, bizarrely. But yes, so Star Wars Day. Star Wars, I said, as a film, the franchise means quite a lot for me, just because it's one of the films that got me into science fiction in 1977, because I'm that old. And I said, taken on to the prequels that I never used to like, and then my wife got me into, and I've decided I like them now. But hey, what do we know? So I just scratching my nose. But my main talk tonight was, I was going to do a video a while ago. I spoke to it about it on podcast I do with Alan. By the way, this month's podcast is getting released tomorrow. I think I've got it signed up to go. But I mentioned it to him in one of those about, I was going to do a video called BookTube Has a Classics Problem. And I was trying to put this video together, just sort of writing down some ideas in it. And I was struggling with a way of putting it together. An easy way to put together sort of an interesting video, one that wasn't going to take me hours of editing and even scripting. Not that I script a lot, but I was just trying to find a way to do it, and I struggled with it. So in the end, I sort of vaguely gave up. And I thought, actually, one of these live streams is quite a way of doing it. So yeah, so this is my BookTube Has a Classics Problem, but it's more of a roundabout of BookTube Has a Book Problem, which sounds a bit weird. And also, this week I'm doing this on StreamYard because I want to try out a feature they've got, which means I can show you the article I'm going to be referencing. And I'm just wondering how well this is going to work. So this isn't what triggered this idea. I've been reading around quite a lot and seeing a lot of BookTube channels, and it's the way that people talk about classics and what they define as classics, but sort of Penguin Classic-y type things. And it's like held in some reverence, sort of over reverence in some ways. Are they books everybody should read? We should all read. And some of them are good books and some of them are read, but it's like, if you don't read these books, there's something wrong with you, or if you don't like these books, there's something wrong with you. And the same happens in sort of genre books. In even sort of science fiction and fantasy fields, which is one of the ones that close to my heart. You get, if you don't like certain books or you don't love certain books, you're sort of looked down upon in some weird way. But classics, I think, has got a real problem, especially on BookTube. There's a channel which I cannot remember its name of, and it's basically this one person who decided he wanted to become a reader, and he had to read all these classic books to become a reader, which I find a really weird sort of way of thinking about it. To me, you should be reading what you enjoy, if that makes any sense. If it doesn't, let me know. Let me know in the comments if you do this after the fact. If you notice I'm an hour earlier today. Hi, Matthew. But yes. Howdy, Bard. Oh, baffed. That was it. But yes, part of the reason I decided to use StreamYard this year is so I can whack the comments up this week. Whack the comments up. But yes, my idea is that BookTube has a problem with classics. This sort of pressure put on people that you must read certain classic books, so-called defined as classics. And in some ways, we could blame it on Penguin, the Rhyme of Classics books. But this article that I found from 2016, I'm going to try this experiment with this thing that I found on StreamYard, which is why I wanted to use StreamYard this week. I should be able to put this article up. It worked. I think it worked if you're seeing what I'm seeing. And this article was from, yes, article's about 2016, but it said it's about a survey. It's got, obviously the title is "Don't Read Classic Books Because You Think You Should do it for fun," which is obviously what we should all be doing, reading books for fun. Yes, there's books for education, obviously. But the opening paragraph is quite good. Is there something in the human soul that makes us want to castigate ourselves for not having read the books we feel we should have? A couple of years ago, Amazon gave us a bucket list of books to create a well-read life, or at least make us feel bad about not having read anywhere near enough of them. Last week, Sean Kane laid us out bare by admitting she hasn't read Ulysses. Actually, neither have I. I've got a James Joyce book somewhere. It's not a sort of thing that I've ever really wanted to read. This week, YouGov tells us only 4% of Brits have read War and Peace. And although 14% wish they had, 3% have read Les Miserables. And although 10% want to, 7% have read Moby Dick, with 8% aiming to. Okay, so this survey of 1,600 British adults was intended to discover the 19th century classic novels British people say they would like to read if they had time and the patience. Oliver Twist, the most popular classic on the list, read by 21% of the respondents, with Pride and Prejudice and Little Women both at 15%. Bizarrely, my wife at the moment is listening to a audiobook of Oliver Twist. I like myself a bit of Dickens. So this is like this wish list. More people wish they'd read War and Peace, and you think, War and Peace? I've not read War and Peace. Oh, I like that. I will. Yeah, classic is something everybody wants to have read, but nobody wants to read. Yeah, I think everything's quoted as being Mark Twain. Like War and Peace, it's not a book that's ever. I know it's some ridiculously huge book. Not anything that's sort of been the top of my list of wanted to read. The lowest one of people wanted to read on this list is Little Women, which I've not read. Let's flick down there. So War and Peace, followed by Les Miserables, Moby Dick, Picture of Dorian Gray, Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky, Tale of Two Cities, which I read because I like Charles Dickens. Frankenstein, which I've read. Great Expectations, which are the ones I've read. Charles Dickens. Anna Karenina, nope. Count of Monte Cristo, Dumas. That's another one of those books I'd quite like to read, but get around to. Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. No, but I've got a copy back there somewhere. I'll pick up reading. Dracula. Yes, I've read that. Women in White, which have I heard of? Yes, I've heard of. And we go down all these sort of normal ones. Heart of Darkness. I suppose who defines these as classics, I suppose, if they're long-lived. What's interesting, the next paragraph of this, the list, it has to be fair, has irritated a few authors, including our own Stephen King expert, James Smythe, who took issue with YouGov's description of its lineup as books people would read if they had the patience, saying that patience is needed to read these books, both to means of books, and suggests that if you're not mentally able to read them, here's a novel thought. Start acting like a book is a mountain. Start acting like they're a thing people read for fun in their free time. Smythe wrote on Twitter. in some ways, I agree. Books can be challenging. Some books are challenging, and some books are not challenging. But if we keep putting them on some weird pedestal, I think that sort of demeans them, and it demeans the people who've. Let's come out of this now. I need to look at my ugly face again. It can demean them, and it can demean people trying to read them. If you build up a book that's going to be really, really difficult to read, and you tell people it's some hard classic, that can put people off who would really love that book from reading it. If that makes any sense to anybody. Trying to think of an example, because somebody recently said a book that they'd read that was built up to be some really difficult book and wasn't. Actually, if you come out of the sort of classic 19th century classics into books that people say that are hard to read, is ones that come to mind are the Malazan series, which I've never actually read because I don't know, I've just never got around to reading them. But people build these up as incredibly difficult books to read. And from what I've heard, though, from people who I respect, they are no more difficult than any other book. I think their narrative is just slightly different to other people. So it's from, yes, Gene Wolfe talks about in an interview about how he wants to keep SF outside academic study because it's outside a ghetto status, preserve its attraction to readers. That's a good point. Gene Wolfe, I've got a huge respect to Gene Wolfe. He's one of my favorite authors, and his books can be seen as difficult. Well, not difficult, just challenging in some ways because it's quite flowery prose, and he never tells you what's going on. You're discovering things. If you read the Book of the New Sun, you're discovering things that's going on. Like Gene Wolfe, probably about at least 3 or 4 books in my top sort of 10 favorite books of all time. But the outsider state, like people like Brian Aldiss, sort of enabled the study of science fiction in that sort of way, more academic studies. People look upon Dune as quite a complicated book. It's not sort of one of my favorite books, but that is now has some weird reverence of some almighty classic along that you should like and you should love. That is almost getting to the status of some of these sort of 19th century so-called classics of literature. And I think BookTube has a big issue of building these books up and making them sound academic. Yes, and I agree. If something's assigned reading, it loses its attraction. I've got books I think everybody has that they were made to read at school that you probably discount because of that. Though saying that, in my last years of my English literature, we were allowed to pick the books that we were to study, and I picked things like A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, which I really, really loved. And to go against that, one book that I was forced to read was Brighton Rock, Graham Greene's Brighton Rock. But that's actually a book I really, really do love. Yeah, I do think people are, as you say there, Matthew, too much made the difficulty of Wolfe turns to read off. When I first got into Wolfe, because I'm old enough, the Book of the New Sun, the first book, the Shadow of the Torture, was published, and I picked it up basically because I liked the cover, the original covers, not knowing what I was getting into. I'd not read any reviews, nobody told me about them, and they are like a discovery. Things get revealed as you're going along, but because I had no expectation on those, I didn't realize until after I read them that people said that these were so-called difficult and challenging books, which I don't think are they. Not really. They're like any other book. You just go into them. If you go into them with your mind open, you'll get them. Yeah, the secrets especially on the Book of the New Sun. When you're on your about third reread, I've read them. I read them every few years, and there's still stuff I find. There is still stuff. I keep going on. If you look at you pick them up, some blurb by Ursula Le Guin. Yeah, it's good when you read some stuff by respected writers that say about them. But as I said, Wolf is really quite a good example of books that have counted as difficult to read. In some ways, I've just started reading the Wheel of Time books. Well, I'm starting on the first one, and I've decided to read them slowly in order to take my time to as stuff reveals to me, because I know very little about them compared to a lot of people. But sometimes it's just how you approach books. And I think BookTube has a real problem with bigging up these books as difficult and how hard they are to read, or how we should all read those books. And I think it comes down to read what you love. I love reading film novelizations. I've got many film novelizations I love. Are these high literature? Probably not. Some of them are written by good people, like Alan Dean Foster and even some classic authors. But we should just all read, unless you've got a specific reason that you have to read it for study. We should just enjoy what we want, and we shouldn't feel bad about it. I like that. Yeah, when you discover a book, you get to own it. But when the internet is shouting, you need to read this, it paradoxically alienating. Which, yes, in some ways, part of the reason why I've taken so long to read The Wheel of Time. Initially started that I saw the Eye of the World when it was first published on the shelf, and I hated the cover. But then over the years, and especially the past few years on the internet, people have been shouting that The Wheel of Time is the best thing ever. And I can get very contrary, and in some ways I've avoided it because of that. And then I've just started reading it and thinking, actually, this is quite good. But I think all this shouting, rabidness some fans of books and that get, will put people off in the same way that people telling you how hard and difficult some book is. What was the other book that I was thinking of that came to mind? Was Don Quixote. Don Quixote's big book. And I read that last year for the first time. And it's not a difficult book to read, it's just long. But I've heard it's one of these books of sort of classic literature that people big up as some really big informative text. It's got a lot of history behind it, and it's an incredibly interesting book. But you can just put people off by just telling them that these are classic books. I think we just need to, in some ways, there's a classifications of them. When you start deciding what a book should be classified as, I think in some way you can downplay books. The term YA, which is a term I hate because it's more of a sales thing, is now used as by some quarters as a demeaning term. Oh, it's just a YA book, which I think sort of demeans the people reading it, and can demean the genre. It's a genre that didn't really sort of exist before about sort of 20 years ago. But the way it's used as like a demeaning term, whereas some of them are probably very well written. It's not sort of books I pick up myself, but I'm not going to demean them because I don't know enough about the sort of books that they count as this. And it's just a really, really bad way to. If you look at Northern Lights, his Dark Materials books, they were technically, when they were released, counted as YA books. And then they sort of moved away from that marketing ploy, because I don't think they wanted to almost get tainted by that marketing term, which is the only conclusion I can form about. But I know when they were originally released, that's what they were released as. But it's one of these terms. This is why, in some ways, as I said at the beginning, I struggled to make a proper video about this. I said I was going to do a video called BookTube Has a Classics Problem. And I struggled to put all this together in one thing because it's so disparate, all the elements of whether it's books being built up in the classics form, and in some ways books being demeaned in other ways by certain terminology. And I think, as you said, we do discovering books by yourself, as much as BookTube and BookTok and that is a great resource to find stuff and get interested in certain areas of literature and reading. it can it can put people off, just by certain people recommending things, or the way it's recommended, or I said the rabidness of some of the sort of fans. I really like the idea of when you're reading it, you get to own it yourself, because I've got history of books I remember where I read them, where I brought them, and things like that. And I think in this age of everything almost being at your fingertips, it's more difficult to discover things. I used to discover things going into bookshops. I've got many a science fiction book that I picked up just because I went into a shop and found a cover that I liked. It's a thing that I would rarely do nowadays, by the fact I live somewhere where I haven't really got any bookshops. But even if I lived down south over on the mainland, I doubt it's a thing that I would really do, because it's just not the same as the way it's marketed and the way they push the books. Secondhand bookshops I might do a similar thing, but then that's because I've got knowledge in the areas that I would be looking at for the secondhand books. But I said I thought that article was quite interesting because of that, because people were classifying books of classics people would read if they would technically have the time or have the concentration for it. And I just don't think you can classify it like that. So, yeah, that's my sort of 2 pence worth on that little piece. So I hope that's made a bit of sense. I don't know. Did you see my I showed at the beginning of the video? Jar Jar Binks for you. This is from Star Wars Day. Anybody who wasn't around at the beginning, because that was my weekend watching Star Wars films. We watched so I went to the cinema to see the first film, and then we watched the rest of the prequel trilogy when we got home. So that was my weekend. And I think that was about the main things I was going to say on this week's stream. As I said, what I quite liked, the reason I've started doing these is just nice little bits to do things that I wouldn't make videos about. So if anybody has any ideas about stuff that they think might interest me, just send me a message along. My email's below somewhere, attached to the comments. Just send me across if you've got any ideas. But I'd just like to ramble on for a bit for half an hour, because my wife lets me. I can't think of anything else. My recommendations of stuff to read at the moment is, I'm enjoying The Wheel of Time. I've got another video coming out. I probably will be recording that tomorrow if I get time, of the second part of me reading The Eye of the World. If you've seen the first part of that prologue, and literally I am reading it slowly, absorbing it, because I said I know very little about it. I watched the TV series last year, or was it the year before it was released, the first season, and I didn't have a clue what was going on. There was a bit at the end I don't know, and that is, pardon me, that is probably the only bit I know about it. So I've been quite surprised when reading it. And I did the video the other day on the prologue, and then the next one I'm going to do on the first 10 chapters, because at the moment I'm just reading past that one, chapter 11 or 12, and slowly reading that. And I'm going to just my thoughts on it, and it's all spoilers, so all the Wheel of Time people will probably laugh at me what I say about it, but I just think it's an interesting way to discover a book. And it reminds me of how I discovered books in the past, in some ways, of how you, as you said, Matthew, you almost get to own it and discover them all by yourselves. So yeah, that's been quite interesting. And I must admit, if this works on this book, I might try it on some others, if the series of videos feels like I'm enjoying it. Got my podcast with Alan from Big L. That's BookTube's coming out tomorrow, if anybody's interested. And just my normal stuff's coming out probably over the next week. I've got a epilogue for my April stuff. But I think that's me done for the while, unless there's anybody out there who wants to chime in and ask me any questions, but I doubt anybody does. and it's a bit of a shorter one this week. Actually, it's about half an hour. So I will say goodbye to you all, and thank you for popping in. I will be back. I said I'm going to do another one. It's 7 o'clock is probably now going to be the usual time of doing these on Wednesday, just because it works in better for my life, basically. It just fits in quite nicely for what I'm doing. So I will, if any of you creators out there, I'll probably see your videos around. Anybody else? And thank you all for popping by, and I will speak to you all very soon. Bye. Good night. Good evening. Have a good night. And let's work out how to stop this.